All right, our next speaker is Major General Wolfgang Renner, the Deputy Chief of Staff, Cyber Defense for Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, SHAPE. He has served in a variety of staff and command positions at various echelons in coalition headquarters to include assignments in Bonn, Kosovo, and Cologne. He's also a graduate of the NATO Defense College in Rome. Welcome, General Renner. Sir.
So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. So I do hope you're still ready to go. So I have to add one point to the introduction. As the commander, NATO CIS Group, I directly supporting to SACEUR. As the Deputy Chief of Staff, I'm reporting to the Chief of Staff, SHAPE, 2 4-stars. This is a challenge, I can tell you. But I managed to escape. At least for a couple of days, because I could combine with another visit tomorrow, and this is the reason why I'm here, and I'm really glad. And up front, it's an honor to be able to share this venue with so many leaders in the cyberspace community. So I have found the discussions here in CyCon US very informative so far, and I do hope I'm able to make a strong contribution to the dialogue. NATO, and I have to stress that indeed, is a relative newcomer in the operational world of cyberspace. And I will give a quick history lesson, but I will be brief, on how we arrived here shortly. Despite that, we take our responsibilities in cyberspace very seriously. NATO has brought its history, told the world that an attack against one ally is an attack against the alliance, and that has been an effective deterrent in the domains of air, land, and maritime. To deter those with malicious intent in cyberspace is another matter. I'd like to talk to you today about how we intend to do that. Specifically, I'd like to share with you our activities to build our Cyberspace Operations Center, or CyOC for short, as we call it, at SHAPE headquarters in Mons, Belgium. But first, as promised, a bit of history. Like any organization, NATO protects its networks through application of cyberspace security measures. To operationalize cyberspace, we had to change our approach. We had to adapt to the world that changes around us. The urgency with which we are moving is driven by NATO's decision to adapt its NATO, or the command structure, something we call command structure, NATO command structure adaptation. Recognizing the resurgence of near-peer adversaries to the alliance and the security challenges associated with that, NATO decided that for the first time since the end of the Cold War, it needed to grow in numbers. This is not a decision made specifically about the perceived threats in cyberspace, but rather a response to the overall challenges to the alliance. Concurrently, NATO also recognized that around the world, virtually every military engagement and certainly every military operation contains cyberspace aspects. The nations of the alliance have certainly recognized this, and have increasingly bolstered their defenses from a cyberspace perspective. The alliance itself officially recognized this in July 2016, when it recognized cyberspace as a domain of operations. And again in February 2017, when it approved a 3-year plan to operationalize cyberspace, something we call the Cyberspace Roadmap for short. We are about halfway through that plan and making steady progress. And just last summer, when the heads of state approved the NCS adaptation plan, which includes the plan to establish a CyOC, Cyberspace Operations Center, the most tangible aspect of operationalizing cyberspace was given the green light. So in essence, NATO has recognized there is another place in which it must defend the alliance. It's a place you cannot locate on any map. Unlike the other domains, it's man-made, and it doesn't exist without networks and routers and storage devices and transmission mediums. It's difficult to command and control, and yet we must find a way to perform command and control within it. It's a domain which enables the other three domains, and it's a domain in which you can achieve effects independent of the other domains as well. And how you perform in this domain affects virtually everything you do. This is the challenge my team and many other stakeholders in NATO are working on presently. How to play this card in a way that best preserves the goals of the alliance. It's a complicated proposition, but one we are confident we can achieve. Some people are intimidated by or simply don't understand the essence of what we mean when we talk about operationalizing cyberspace. In some ways, granted, the concept is complex. But we can make it easier to understand when we talk in terms that people are already familiar with. So if your aim is to operationalize something, you must talk like an operator. Military operators are sometimes intimidated when the topic of cyberspace operations is brought up because they believe it's some kind of magic that requires a doctorate degree in computer science to understand. Nothing could be further from the truth. Cyberspace operations are simply operations which concur in cyberspace, but also within the other domains. Military operations are not all that hard to understand. First, you identify a commander who will be supported to achieve specific operational objectives. In this example on the slide, let's call him the commander of a joint task force. The JTF commander needs to know what his geographic area of operations is, consisting of chunks of land, area of ocean, and of course the air above. We call this the Joint Operational Area, or for short, JOA. Then he needs to know his objectives, and he can then articulate how many boats, sailors, tanks and soldiers, and airplanes and airmen he needs to achieve his objectives. Operationalizing cyberspace means we now recognize that all those boats and sailors and tanks and soldiers and airplanes and airmen require systems to sail, roll, and fly. We also recognize that there are systems in this joint operational area which can be commanded and controlled by the JTF commander to make sure those capabilities are preserved. Those systems need to be defended, not just from conventional attack, but also from attacks in cyberspace, where they do their business. We all know that cyberspace does not have geographic reference points and is globally interconnected. The JTF commander, therefore, is often reliant on systems that provide for reachback to higher echelon headquarters. When those assets are owned by NATO, we can still control them, but sometimes at a higher level. We may, for instance, have to use SACEURS, that's the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, authorities or SACEURS authorities to command and control those assets. So in essence, we need to expand the JOA to account for cyberspace assets that are situationally supporting the mission of the JTF commander. The NATO force structure in any given operation includes assets which are sovereign in nature. For instance, NATO doesn't own the ships which participate in an operation. They belong to the nation who brings them to the JOA. There are systems on those ships which must be defended from a cyberspace perspective, but must be defended by the nations who owns them. There is also critical national infrastructure within the JOA which could impact NATO's operations. SCADA systems, which support a rail network, for instance, which need to be defended. That infrastructure is also sovereign, so the nations need to defend it. Finally, there's the cyberspace area of interest. Assets in cyberspace which may have an impact on NATO's ability to successfully conduct operations. This includes commercial systems, the electromagnetic spectrum, civil and government systems, essentially cyberspace itself. It's all fair game for attack in the eyes of potential adversaries. Also, we cannot actively defend them. We must have situational awareness of them because of their potential impact on our objectives. So again, keeping with the theme of speaking like an operator, we don't want to create something that nobody will recognize. NATO told us to defend cyberspace as effectively as we defend air, land, and maritime environment. This was emphasized in the 3 successive documents which led to the approval, the plan to adapt NATO command structure. So we are creating something we have for the other 3 domains, a theater component for cyberspace. Let me explain what this means. Before the decision to operationalize cyberspace, SACEUR had 3 theater components, 1 for each operational domain: air command, land command, and maritime command. The commanders of those components are the domain advisors to SACEUR regarding issues specific to those domains. The CyOC functions as the theater component for cyberspace, and I, as the Deputy Chief of Staff Cyberspace, am SACEUR's domain advisor for cyberspace. But the question, why did we not just create a command? We believe this is a prudent approach to grow our capability in cyberspace. Note that as part of NCS adaptation, the NATO strategic commands will grow by well over 1,000 personnel, which is costly for the nations of the alliance. We also recognize that cyberspace talent is difficult to develop and even harder to retain. So by starting small and deliberately developing at a reasonable pace, we have a higher chance of success. The approach of building the CyOC within SHAPE also provides a centralized strategy and allows the CyOC to straddle the strategic and operational levels of conflict. This is important when decisions in one JOA may impact another JOA from a cyberspace perspective. Finally, we believe we will reach initial and final operational capability faster with that approach, since there's no need to create a separate staff. Here's the mission of the CyOC. Think of it as a cyclic process which is always ongoing. First, achieve situational awareness of the cyberspace environment. Second, plan and coordinate the cyberspace aspects of operations. Third, ensure your operation in the cyberspace domain support success in all the other missions. This is how we have recognized the CyOC, a situational awareness branch, a plans branch, and an operations branch. In order to achieve situational awareness in cyberspace, we require 3 things. First and foremost, we need to understand our missions. Where are we operating? When are the most important times of those operations? What are the critical information exchange requirements upon which decision makers can rely? The answers to these questions come from the mission owners, who are also the individuals who can make a decision on whether a risk in cyberspace is acceptable or must be mitigated. We also need to understand the CIS technical aspects of the mission. This requires mission mapping to the networks. When a node goes down, what part of the mission is impacted. Does the mission stop or is it degraded? Are these NATO-owned systems or sovereign capabilities? The list includes elements and agencies who are part of NATO and some who are not. Finally, we need to understand the current threat picture. This includes information available through intelligence channels from the nations to the alliance, but also information provided by commercial subscription services from the industry service providers and that which can be obtained from the media. We've used all this data in our situational awareness branch in order to support the role of the domain advisor, always with a keen focus on how incidents in cyberspace affect our missions. As stated earlier, we need to treat operations in cyberspace the same way we treat operations in the other domains, and that means using the same processes. Our plans branch will ensure cyberspace is reflected in all active and future operations plans and other documents which support operations. They also are the forefront of making sure we have a trained force prepared to operate throughout the full spectrum of operations. We do this through ensuring cyberspace is reflected in all NATO exercises, and that we have specific training events and exercises for our cyberspace professionals. Our singular focus is to assure our missions. This is about knowing what the operational impact is of a cyberspace incident before the incident happens, and providing advice to commanders and other decision makers on what to do to ensure the mission continues. This is about knowing where your vulnerabilities are in cyberspace and instigating mitigation of those vulnerabilities. And it's about knowing how to operate in a cyberspace contested environment, because we know that a cyberspace contested environment is guaranteed whenever and wherever we operate. Regarding integration of sovereign effects, NATO has clear that we will not perform offensive cyberspace operations. However, we will integrate sovereign cyberspace effects from the allies who are willing to volunteer them. I'd also like to point out that although this is what everybody likes to talk about, it's in reality a very small part of our overall mission in cyberspace. Cyberspace defense is what we will take most of our time, because as I pointed out earlier, cyberspace is always on. And there are malicious actors who are trying to do us harm in cyberspace every day. Also, work to operationalize cyberspace in NATO has been underway for the last couple of years. We are really just getting started. The CyOG itself was born 31st August 2018, just a couple of months ago. So we are really in the crawl phase, I would like to call it. And also, I'm not going to share the dates where we anticipate reaching our initial operating capability, nor our full operating capability. I can assure you we have a very aggressive schedule. We have talented men and women working very hard now to establish our processes and procedures. We are updating ongoing operations and missions to ensure the cyberspace aspects of mission assurance are identified and addressed. And we are planning for future operations. We are, as the saying goes, flying the plane while we are building it, and there's a tremendous appetite for the capabilities that we must provide, I can assure you. So, here's our organization. The SHAPE strategic staff functions are in amber. Note the traditional J6 functions, which carry on the very important functions of CIS, service management, and strategic plans and policy. And we understand cyberspace as the combination of CIS and cyber, which means no cyber without any network. And this is because we came up with this expression, cyberspace. I also call your attention to the NATO CIS group, which extends the static NATO networks to our operators in the field. In the blue is the SIOC, functioning as I already addressed, the theater component for cyberspace, but built within the SHAPE headquarters. Also notice the linkage to the CCOMC, which functions as the current operations center within SHAPE headquarters, to ensure cyberspace operations are fully integrated in all the operational processes which must take place in the other domains. With that, we follow I call it the effects-based approach to operations. From whatever domain this effect could be provided. Effects-based approach. And we are about to integrate cyberspace operations into the current C2 construct. And never forget about STRATCOM. Prior, during, or after fielding an effect, STRATCOM is important. That, ladies and gentlemen, concludes the formal portion of my briefing. I will be happy to entertain your questions and comments. Thank you for your attention.
Hi, General. Sidney Friedberg from Breaking Defense. Can you you mentioned 1,000 personnel being added to NATO headquarters. Can you go into more detail about the assets you're expecting to build up, both the human and the technical? In particular, how do you get situational awareness of all the different national networks? Is there some automated way that they report directly to you, a machine to machine? Or is it all people with Excel spreadsheets and sticky notes yelling at each other on the phone?
So thank you for the question. Let me clarify the first part. The approximately 1,000 additional PE slots. This is true for whole ACO and ACT, for the BISC, strategic commands, and this is also the subordinate commands as well as SHAPE. So this is the total number. This is not just cyberspace, 1,000, to make this fairly clear. The SIOC will be recruited from existing SHAPE staff for the time being, with additional manpower to be injected. In the very first step, this will be a number which is below 100 for sure. Please understand, no more details in this environment. And second part of your question, how do we organize it? So first of all, we have to have an idea of NATO networks, which means close relationship linkage to the NCIA, which is basically the provider of the core net. It means the systems run by the agency. This is the focal point, the Network Operations Center, as well as the NCIRC, which is basically giving us the threat vector, what is going on in the cyber security arena. And based on this data, the operational part is to inject intelligence, the what, the why, and the rationale behind, because of a specific situation in the agency. So this will be the very first start, and in the second step, this is pending nations' decisions, of course. You're perfectly aware that the decisions in NATO at 29 is somehow or sometimes not that easy. This has to be resolved over time, how we get this picture broader. Because the picture, if it's done, we would provide to the subordinate commands, of course, for SACEUR as the first customer, of course, for his situational awareness, but also for the commanders in these subordinate areas, and even to the nations and to the agency back. This is the approach.
So why don't we go over to question number 3 here?
Yep.
Thank you. Patrick Tucker with Defense One. This might be a touch too operational for you, but I wonder if you could comment on malicious or aggressive cyber activity that you may have seen during the recent Trident Juncture exercise, and what you learned from Trident Juncture that's relevant to the future structure of NATO cyber command and institutions.
Yeah, thank for that question. Exercises, this may be very general, but exercises are always about learning. What we did inject in tried and juncture networks defensive elements already. This was done, and this was of course detected. And what we now see is it is important to inject cyberspace or cyber play into exercises that the people are trained and they get more familiar with that. So this we are taking very serious because this would be the preparation for, let's say, large-scale events. We have to prepare in our planning, operations, and missions, of course. So exercises are important. We do defensive parts already, and we learn and how to counter that.
Yeah, but returning briefly to the first part of the question, did you see any unexpected cyber activity that was aimed at NATO partners or during that exercise that you can comment?
Simple answer, no.
No? Thank you.
You can expect it. If you do not expect it, you're better off here.
Question number 2.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Good afternoon. Major Tennille Scott, Army Cyber Command. I was wondering, what is the strategy to hold adversaries at risk in the cyber domain without an offensive capability? Thank you.
This is a very good question, but let me put it that way. It's basically similar to the other domains. If you want to deter, you have to have capabilities available at your stock. This is true for the air, the land, the maritime domain, and it has to become true, I'm careful on that, for the cyber domain or cyberspace as domain of operations. Well, this is what we really have to find out, and I addressed it. This is a difficult part. Per se, NATO is defensive and a defensive alliance. If you want to do something active, you could do it in the cyberspace domain, but you could do it in another domain as well. So, and this is the whole posture talking about deterrence in a prudent course of action, but in a joint approach. This morning it was a multi-domain approach. So in NATO, we talk about this joint effects approach. This is basically the same concept behind, and this is what you have to be prepared to have a prudent toolbox you could react. And this could include the cyber domain, of course.
Question number 1.
Yep.
Good afternoon, sir. Matt McRae from the U.S. Naval Academy. Cooperation has been a big topic of discussion today, and given NATO is an alliance of 29 countries, it is the essence of large-scale cooperation. So my question is, given the large-scale cooperation on the cyber topic, what problems or issues have you run into, and what is being done to overcome them?
So this is very early to answer this question in detail. But what we are doing is reach out to the nations to get this cooperation on this field, and this is close to intelligence, of course, to get this picture or to enhance the situational awareness picture. This is the one part. So we are about that, having already contacts to a couple of nations on that. And the second part is I call it offensive, and I have to reiterate, we are defensive. The alliance is defensive as itself. If you're talking about offensive effects, it's always, and I repeat that, voluntary initial contributions under the responsibility of the NATO conducting this effect, if it's an offensive effect. So this has to be really investigated. There are investigations ongoing, already contacts to a couple, much less nations, but a couple of nations. So we will not go into detail, so please accept that. This has to be orchestrated, how we do it, no? How we execute it if there is the need or necessity to do that. But still, it's a national responsibility fielding an offensive effect.
Chris Miller from the Air Force Academy. I'm curious whether your distribution of personnel or the operational priorities that you see developing are organized by type of threat or type of target.
Talking the cyber space as a domain?
In the cyber domain. In other words, state actors, non-state actors, national infrastructure, military operations, those kinds of priorities.
So I'd like to remind our stand-up date was 31st August, so we are really in the crawl phase. So this is not really done. I have to admit it. I'm really clear. But the threat picture, and you're perfectly right, consists of different components. This could be states, this could be groups, this could be criminals, this could be a variety of actors in cyberspace, and this we have to cover in a whole picture. This is meaning the threat picture, the situational awareness picture. We have to take care of that. But you need the information, or you need the data maybe to populate the situational awareness picture. So right approach, but not wait for the time being and on the different areas of potential actors in the cyberspace domain.
Unfortunately, sir, we're out of time.
Are we out of time? I'm sorry for that.
Keep us going here.
All right.
We've got, so thank you very much for your comment. Your great remarks.
Thank you very much.